confronting Canada's brutal legacy of residential schools. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today on The Newsmakers. Recent discoveries of mass graves containing hundreds of Indigenous schoolchildren are once again shining a light on a shameful chapter of Canadian history. Could the cancellation of Canada Day provide comfort to First Nations people and atone for sins of the past? Plus, an anniversary protest where journalists and police far outnumber demonstrators. The coinciding centenary of the Chinese Communist Party sees mass celebrations in Beijing alongside quiet streets in Hong Kong. Has the national security law changed this city forever? That's our top story today on The Newsmakers.
July 1 is a significant day for the people of Hong Kong. It marks the handover of the territory from the UK to China in 1997, and for 2 decades, it's been an annual day of protest. Thousands of Hong Kongers took part in these pro-democracy rallies, a form of freedom of expression not allowed anywhere else in China. This year, the city's streets have gone all but quiet. There was no official permission given for marches to take place. Authorities said that was due to the pandemic. But many residents are also wary of the national security law that was brought in 1 year ago after anti-government protests rocked Hong Kong. It criminalises acts of subversion, secession, collusion with foreign forces and terrorism, and carries a maximum sentence of life in prison. Hong Kong's leaders say the national security law has restored order. Critics argue the parameters of the law are ill-defined, and it's been used as a tool to crush dissent and political opposition.
The League of Social Democrats will hold on to the last remaining piece of freedom of speech to express our political views. We hope that Hong Kong people, just like our call today to the central government to not forget its founding beliefs, we hope that Hong Kong people will not forget their basic beliefs to uphold justice and fight for freedom.
This July 1 is also unlike any other because it's one of the most important days in modern Chinese history. It's the centenary of the Chinese Communist Party. During President Xi Jinping's address to the nation, he made a point of saying that social stability would be ensured in Hong Kong.
我们要全面准确贯彻一国两制，港人治港。
Under that system, the territory is supposed to have a high degree of autonomy, but the implementation of the national security law has irrevocably shifted the political and legal landscape, and it's had a chilling effect on the media. The pro-democracy tabloid Apple Daily was forced to close after 5 of its editors and executives were arrested and more than $2 million worth of assets were frozen. Its founder, the media tycoon Jimmy Lai, was among the first to be arrested under the law. On June 24, as the last ever edition hit newsstands, Hong Kongers came out in droves to show their support, an act of solidarity, but also one of defiance.
This is a way of expressing ourselves. It may even be a temporary way for releasing some of the pressure we feel. We would like to tell the authorities that we, Hong Kong people, are never scared. We would do everything for our freedom. We might not be able to chant slogans anymore, but we still want to express ourselves.
Although sometimes I don't agree with what the paper wrote, a society should have a variety of voices. We can't eliminate those voices just because of certain reasons.
The days of thousands of voices being heard in unison on the streets seem long gone, relegated to memory, with little chance of returning to life. Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss the governance of Hong Kong is lawmaker Holden Chow. He's the vice chairman of the Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong, the city's largest pro-Beijing party. Thank you so much for being with us. You're from Hong Kong. It is one of the most...
Thank you.
It is one of the most prosperous, you're welcome, prosperous, business-friendly and safest big cities in the world. I have to ask you, why force changing a dynamic after decades of so much prosperity to bring it in line with mainland China?
I have to make that very clear and set the record straight. The central government has enacted the national security law for Hong Kong because we have seen the riots back in 2019. If you recall all the riots and the turmoil, people are not safe. And you can't even express your opinion against the protesters back in 2019. Otherwise, you will be even burned. Somebody even were even burned because they expressed opinion against the protesters. So what I'm saying is the central government enacted the national security law for Hong Kong last year, and finally it brought us peace and stability. And we do need the peace and stability to survive. Otherwise, nobody could survive, so I have to set the record straight. So if somebody tried to criticize
I understand what you're saying. I know the argument, but in 2019, I mean, mass protests broke out because people were unhappy with what they saw as China changing the democratic fabric of Hong Kong's governance, and that the national security law that was suddenly imposed. You know that's true. That is the other side of the argument. There are people in Hong Kong who believe that China is simply infringing on a democratic tradition, and that it's not necessary. Let me ask you honestly, if those protests...
I have to make that, well, that is wrong. The accusation is wrong. I have to make that clear. The accusation is wrong. Well, I am a lawmaker from Hong Kong. I have to set the record straight. You have to allow me to explain the scenario. Now, if you are in Hong Kong back in 2019, you see all the riots and you see all the chaos.
I did see the riots, and I know that there were violent protesters.
People are deprived the rights to go out safely. They can't even express opinion. And let me finish. Sorry, let me finish.
It went from arresting rioters to arresting journalists.
If you are against,
go ahead.
Because they are against, if people are against the national security law, if they are collude with foreign politicians, if they are using press freedom as an excuse to endanger the national security, that's wrong, and we need to have a proper lawful enforcement. I know what you're going to ask, but I'm give you a strict and right answer that we need to safeguard the national security. Now, let me put that very strict and clear.
You understand what I was going to ask. Because I just wanted to ask a simple question. If the protests hadn't broken out in 2019, if they hadn't broken out over the extradition law, and it seemed to escalate very unfortunately very quickly because of the extradition law controversy, if it hadn't happened, would Beijing be imposing this national security law?
Well, I think, the riots, you see, having gone through all the riots back in 2019, all the chaos, we have seen the loopholes, the existing loopholes for people to exploit to endanger our national security. Well, you see that even the lawmakers from the pan-democrats, they would collude with foreign politicians and ask other countries to impose sanctions over Hong Kong. And that is endangering our national security. And Hong Kong is part of China. I have to make that very clear. And we have every responsibility to safeguard our national security.
Okay.
So
let me ask you,
my answer is clear and simple.
I'm just curious. I mean, as you know, the more Hong Kong is integrated with China, the more it becomes subject to one-party rule. Will you not miss the multi-party democracy that was thriving in Hong Kong that you've actually been a part of?
You probably, with due respect, I probably think that you have a misunderstanding on the one country, two system principle. Well, let me put that very clear. Now, under one country, two system principles, we have our own political systems. And we are running a multi-party system in Hong Kong. And under one country, two systems, our constitutional and political system are based on basic law. So as President Xi Jinping this morning, he rightly point out, he made a very important remarks this morning, that one country, two systems is the principle that we hold dear and is the bedrock for the city's stability and prosperity. And I'm sure that we'll continue to run this one country, two systems and make sure that we'll defend this one country, two systems. And by all means, what I'm saying, if we are trying to defend the one country, two systems, we need to safeguard our national security.
Okay.
We enjoy a high degree of autonomy, and if people are trying to smear our system and saying, well, the central government is kind of infringing our freedom, that's wrong. So I have to make that very clear and refute this sort of falsehoods and untrue allegations.
Okay, Holden Chow, really thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. We greatly appreciate your perspective. Okay, let's broaden out the discussion now. And joining me from Beijing is Zhu Qindo. He is a China affairs analyst. And in London is Hong Kong dissident Simon Chang, who was granted asylum in the UK after alleging torture in Chinese custody. So, thanks both so much for being with us. Simon, I'm going to start with you. You heard the defense of China's position on Hong Kong from Holden Chow just there. But you obviously have a very different perspective given your personal experience while working for the British consulate in Hong Kong. So for you, you think he's defending the indefensible. Why?
Well, I think I totally disagree with what Mr. Chow said, because on June 30, and even today, that will be the 1 year since implementation of the Hong Kong national security law. And the national security law criminalises all dissenting thoughts and speeches. And such an ill-divided law crumbles the public confidence to the basic law, which Mr. Chow said have been enshrined and guarantees the certain freedoms. After cleansing all dissents of all walks of life, pushing pro-democracy activists in jail or in exiles, disqualifying opposition politicians from public offices, arresting and harassing the journalists, shutting down the media which are not with the government, brainwashing the younger generation, promoting the official who are notorious with their suppressive tactics. All the promises of the freedom based on this specific system in Hong Kong had all gone. And now Hong Kong, I would say, is undeniably becoming to be a police state and totalitarian regime, just like mainland China. So I would say two systems already dead.
Okay. Zhu Qindo, what do activists like Simon not understand about what Beijing wants for Hong Kong with its laws and its reforms? Why are they rejecting what you think makes Hong Kong better?
I can give you an example, I think partly because of the international media. Obviously, they're very biased reporting the coverage of what's happening in Hong Kong. Remember, the opposition leaders in Hong Kong, for example, they flew to London, they flew to the Washington D.C. to meet senior leaders, including the former Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, and Pompeo, etc., Nancy Pelosi, to seek help, to seek assistance, basically to overthrow the Hong Kong government and to subvert the Chinese government in Beijing. Do you think any government will tolerate behavior like this? This is a treasonous. Any government will take necessary measures to crack down on such behavior. This is what happened. And you need a national security law to make sure national security interests is well protected. And foreign forces will be prevented from participating in launching color revolution, in supporting violent protests, in storming the Legislative Council, like what happened in Hong Kong.
Okay.
You know, there's a double standard. In the US, January 6th, Capitol Hill, they call it a resurrection. That's a peaceful protest. Okay, a few protesters went into the Capitol Hill, just like what happened in Legislative Council, using force to storm into the Legislative Council, which is largely Parliament of Hong Kong. No place in the world, as long as there's rule of law, will tolerate the behavior
like that. I've heard that parallel
that.
before. Fair enough. But Simon, then let me ask you, I mean, is the international media, is it biased? And are you or were you a tool used for foreign meddling?
No, absolutely not. I would say Mr. Xu, previously he worked for the state media. There has no any sense of free media in mainland China. So it's actually abusing the free media's concept in the overseas and say, there has any freedom to get supportive to the CCP. I wanted to say when Mr. Xu said about revolution, today, there is 100 years after the CCP set up. And in ancient Chinese wisdom, that there has nothing wrong to overthrow dictatorship, and which is the CCP, why that's set up. Because that stand against feudalism, stand against with the emperor, stand against the abusive power. And today, the CCP, from the revolutionary party to becoming a ruling party, and get betrayal to why they set up the Chinese Communist Party. I would be very sad about this after 100 years, and they're going into the exactly opposite way to suppress the people now. How they can be okay to the people, to the Chinese people, to the Hong Kong people. I've been very sad about it because I have no choice to be in exile. I cannot get back to my hometown.
Zhu Qindo, go ahead.
Well, if you're talking about yourself, Simon, you know what happened to you, right? And in one interview with the BBC, you basically acknowledged that you were a spy working for the UK consulate in Hong Kong, and you collected information for your foreign masters, and you were detained in Shenzhen because of what? You were charged of soliciting prostitution in Shenzhen, and you asked the police not to share the information because of a fear of damaging your reputation. And after you were released, okay, you went to London. That's fine. Now, no serious charges is against you, but let's respect the facts. The facts speak louder than this rhetoric. Okay, whatever system in the mainland, in China, but look, China is the most successful country over the past decades. And no country has achieved as much as China did. And the Chinese people's approval rate of their governments is 93%. This is not done by me. This is the result from Ash Center of Harvard University after a survey of 13 years. Okay. You know what? Your legitimacy of the government is in the results, is in the performance. Don't tell me after you get a vote and then somehow you are legitimate. Look at the US Congress from last May to this May, the whole year. Their highest approval rate is 36%. They should be delegitimized, in the clear terms.
Okay, Simon, go ahead.
Well, I would say that to my personal case, I already made clear in front of Ofcom, in front of the international media, that they have a freedom of the media to tell my perspective, the truth. And the fact is that I've been enforced to confess because I have no choice, because I've been handled by the national security officers that time, even before the national security law imposed in Hong Kong. And if I didn't confess, I would be now still in prison, just like other activists now in the prison. So I would say, now, Mr. Xu, you have your freedom to say your support to CCP, but please let the other people in China and Hong Kong to say anything against the leadership, the Chinese leadership. Don't try to cheat others people through international media to say we have freedom to say. What we can see, that's the parade now happening in mainland China and in Hong Kong, that's only authorized and endorsed by the police force. All others opposition protests cannot be authorized and now have been suppressed and kept in silence. What do you think about it?
Okay, Zhu Qindo, I would love to have another minute to allow you to respond to that, but so unfortunately we are out of time for this segment of the Newsmakers. But I do very much appreciate the perspectives of both of you. Thank you so much for being with us. Well, the discovery of 182 unmarked graves on the grounds of a Canadian residential school in British Columbia was confirmed on Wednesday, almost a year after it was first revealed using ground-penetrating radar. Now, earlier this month, two separate sites in BC and Saskatchewan revealed over 900 additional bodies. More than 150,000 Métis, First Nations, and Inuit children attended residential schools from the late 1800s until 1996. But the grave sites were only found after Canada's First Nations began funding their own investigations. Now, in 2015, after 7 years of research and the testimony of 6,000 residential school survivors, Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission published its multi-volume report detailing the complete history of the residential institution system. It concluded the mostly Catholic-run schools amounted to cultural genocide. The report detailed forced assimilation, physical violence, sexual abuse, and even government-sanctioned nutritional experiments on children as young as 7. Investigators hired by the government also identified more than 5,300 individuals accused of abuse. None have been prosecuted. A 300-page section of the report details the locations of school cemeteries and called on the government to help locate and identify children buried there. But no action has been taken. The TRC's request to the federal government for funds to search for the remains of missing children was denied. Requests for the Vatican and other church groups to turn over relevant documents have largely been refused. It's believed that once the grounds of all 139 residential institutions are searched, more graves will be found. The discoveries have led to the defacement and burning of at least 4 Catholic churches and the cancellation of many July 1st Canada Day celebrations. Well, joining me now to talk about this unfinished chapter of Canadian history and how to reconcile with it is Rachel Snow. She's an Indigenous consultant in Calgary. Thanks so much for being with us, Rachel. You know, for as traumatic as it's been, and I can't overstate that, did the confirmation of those mass graves ironically provide somehow a sense of relief, knowing that there is now full recognition and vindication after being ignored really for so long?
Good morning, Amba Waste. I'm not sure that at any time when you find something that points to an atrocity can be a relief. I don't think that our people and the sense of grief that is going across Canada can be understated or can be in any way positive, because what has really happened is that there is across the nation there is collective grief, and we are already a marginalized people, and we already deal with so much hardship through policies, legislation, or court cases. It's just another layer of oppression.
Okay, and then what do you want, though, from the Canadian government? I mean, these abuses have occurred. It's been fully unjust, and more people are recognizing that. But what can the government do? How can the government do right by you now?
Well, the Canadian government can start by repudiating the doctrine of discovery. The Canadian government can start by taking out the racist undertones that are in every piece of their legislation that form the basis for their so-called positioning or their placement here as a nation state. But they have to repudiate the doctrine of discovery, and they have to ensure that all the players who were part of this atrocity are paying for or are taking responsibility for their part in the action, because the churches work very close. The churches were sent out to make friends with many of the Indian or First Nation tribes, the Red Indian tribes. Once they did that, that's when the state moved in order to take over the land. So there's a partnership here that's happening, whether or not, you know, we have the Catholic Church apologizing and actually putting forward dollars for programs to help our people through trauma. That's the further question, and something we need our leaders to push really hard on.
Right. What about the position then of the Catholic Church? I mean, there is no guarantee of an apology, even though those were church-administered schools. Does it matter to have that recognition specifically from the Vatican?
We don't. I think we're done with apologies. And I think if you know what's happening in British Columbia right now, there have been a few churches that have been Catholic churches that have been burnt down. So I think you're seeing a different reaction this time, especially due to the fact that 215 little kids were found in one grave. They were disregarded. They were put in just like a dumping ground. This is uncalled for. This is a crime against humanity. This is finally Canada's so-called human rights record being taken to task, taken to the forefront, and being commented on.
Right.
But Canada, like I said, is complicit with the churches, whether it's a Catholic church, the Anglican, Methodist, United Church, whoever it was. I think Canada and the churches have to get in line together and make one statement.
Just quickly, we were just seeing images of some of those burning churches. Did you find that an appropriate response?
Well, I disagree with violence in any form, but I can see the frustration of people who cannot articulate, people who cannot get their voice heard. Canada recently passed a bill, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, without the grassroots involvement. When the grassroots are not involved, you are going to see pushback. Like we said, you will see the summer of discontent.
And quickly, July 1st, it's Canada Day. I mean, should Canada Day be canceled or just revised?
What is there to celebrate for Canada Day? What is there to celebrate but a country that was stolen, a country built on the history, on the deaths of my people? And what is the Canadian identity? Just, all they have is barbecues and beer drinking and possibly saying a lot of A. Or is there a seance for John A. Macdonald happening somewhere? Because I don't know what the definition of Canada or Canadians are, or what the definition or what their Canadian identity is. But I do know that the history of this land starts 10,000 years ago with my people. That's pre-Canada. That's what we are always celebrating and living. And our existence is the proof that we are survivors and that we have been resisting this oppression for more than 500 years.
Rachel Snow, great to have you. Thank you really so
Thank you.
much for being with us. We appreciate it. And to our viewers, of course, for being with us as well. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.